You will be talking about biodiversity mainly, but of course biodiversity and climate change are very closely interlinked also. They have an impact on each other. So please, the floor is yours, and I think that you have some slides and we get help here. Thank you very much.
Just a second. Well, thank you. Thank you already while we wait for this, for listening to 2 presentations in a row. And I will take you into the climate theme of forests and climate. And of course, biodiversity is an important part of this, as you will see in the course of the presentation. Being at the Aue-Stiftung, let me say this topic resonates for a long time already, for decades, with Finland and with Germany. In Germany, the German economic cooperation, when I was still working at the World Bank, they already started in the 1980s to support and really finance programs for the preservation of rainforests on Earth. Unfortunately, they didn't meet the target, but the effort was good. If you just imagine putting all the world's remaining tropical rainforests into one planet, one continent, it would be a continent roughly the size of Europe. And in many ways, it's an undiscovered continent, and one which, in terms of its natural endowment, and it is being burnt at a horrific rate before it's even fully discovered. For me, the burning of rainforests, which accounts, depending on the year, it goes a little bit up and down, for 15 to 20% of all CO2 emissions on Earth. Just savor this. So we talk about cars, we talk about transport, we talk about our energy systems, and here we let a resource which would just have to be kept in place burn at this very rate. It is stunning. So this is, my presentation will not be about just complaining. You all know this. This is a long-standing, unresolved problem, but rather I would like, after an introduction, to look at the way forward, because there are good initiatives, there are good pilot programs, and if some of these pilots would grow into real things, into real programs, at least we would make substantial progress. So I will talk specifically about Amazonia. It's never good just to talk about Amazonia as, just in one country. I will talk about Brazil afterwards, but keep in mind, this is 8 countries. This is a huge ecosystem, and the carbon stored in its vegetation and soils is of global importance in slowing climate change. There are interesting new research results. There was a good conference at Oxford University last June, showing that the carbon stored in standing rainforest, basically undisturbed or mostly undisturbed rainforest, is much more significant than the carbon you store in replanted, afforested, recovered areas. So we are talking not just about the world's largest rainforest, but also river system. And it's important to see this together, because we are talking about climate. And climate isn't just about CO2, it's about rainfall, meteorological systems. The vapor released from the forest creates vast so-called flying rivers. This is a formulation from the former director of INPA, the research institute in Manaus, because in a sense the waters go up, but with climate change they don't come down. I mean, we've seen this in Europe too. Suddenly the Rhine didn't have the water it used to have. The water was somewhere up there. And this is very significant because south of the Amazon are immense and immensely valuable agricultural areas. So these water systems induce rainfall in Central and Southern South America. Amazonia, of course, is a biodiversity miracle. You have to become passionate about it. It contains at least 1/10 of all species on Earth, and much remains to be discovered. To give you a number, I thought I would mention that more than 2,000 new species of plants and vertebrates have been described just in the past 20 years. I mean, this is the size of our ignorance. Imagine how much more there is to come, provided it is not burned in the first place. Amazonia is not an empty country where once in a while you find an indigenous village. Yes, there are 350 indigenous groups. 60 of them even still live in isolation. But we have a growing urban and rural population. And there are theories. There was a very good Amazonian researcher. She died just a few years ago. Maybe she knew her. You knew her, Berta Becker. And she said, maybe one way to save the rainforest is to have really smart urban centers using the rivers as export lanes and producing whatever, but without cutting the trees for it and thinking that this is just for the timber industry. So having people and urban centers is just a new variant, not all bad, but also a potential. So this is what it looks like. Last year, 8,000 square kilometers just in Brazil burned again. And if you see this, you should also smell it. And you should imagine how you would feel as a monkey or a parrot in there, burning alive. I mean, it's really a very ugly process, and it's not wrong to add a little bit of emotion to this and not just to consider CO2 pure. This is what the land looks like afterwards. This is a deforested area in Maranhão. And now let's go more deeply into the Brazilian Amazon, because we should recognize that quite a few effective measures have been tried, have been put in place. They're not meeting the target, but it's not all black or white, that nobody would be doing anything and this is all bad politics. It's not. Brazil has built its environmental institutions since the 1980s. They have developed one of the strongest environmental legal systems, where you have the category of environmental crimes, and indeed, people who have been apprehended, particularly land clearing without a license or stealing significant amounts of precious wood, have paid high fines. But the area is so large and wide, and law enforcement on the ground is so complicated and costly that these are demonstration cases, but even having a very strong and well thought out law is still difficult. We have vigilance, both on the ground, but also since decades by satellite imagery. Now, satellite imagery is again complicated, because once something burns, like on the picture that I showed you, it's too late. So how do you discover that somebody where there is no visible road or track is preparing to clear a forest illegally? It's not so easy. People have become terribly smart. It's called under the canopy harvesting. So, but there is vigilance, there are data, we know how much burns every year, but we know it too late. There has been tremendous success in the demarcation of vast areas of different status, indigenous reserves, strict nature conservation, national parks, so-called extractive reserves where people are only allowed to go in to tap rubber or to collect Brazil nuts. I unfortunately got a nice slide too late, which shows from 1965 how an empty green space in Amazonia without any conservation areas got filled in. I will let me see. I will show you the map. All these are different categories of conservation areas in Amazonia, and by and large, those areas have remained intact. There's always an attempt here or there to make an invasion, but essentially, this does work to a point. And then under the Climate Convention, there are RED payments for carbon sequestration. RED stands for reductions in the destruction and degradation of forests. Initially, these systems were very slow to come on because there were huge studies as to how much carbon is in this tree, and if a private farmer wants to say, I have this patch of forest, how much is it worth, how much carbon do I sequester per year? There would be a huge study. Now this has become much smarter. I was yesterday at the KfW, the German Development Bank, and they just have state-level agreements now where they say if deforestation is reduced by so much or remains below certain limits, then there are RED payments, and the RED payments go into carbon sequestration or environmentally relevant measures. So it's coming on. It's taking a few years, but I think now there are programmatic possibilities to do more of this. So this is the picture we have, and of course in the southern Amazon is where most of the burning is happening, south of the river. So we have all these efforts, but now we come to the but. I already mentioned how much deforestation there is. There has been a 14% increase just last year, which may have to do with the political winds which are blowing, so that more people think that, you can do certain things without necessarily being caught. Sometimes you have to wait for a while, but then your land is legalized, and it really this year does not look good at all. One way to describe it is the ring of fire around the southern Amazon. There are other troubles looming. There are huge hydropower expansion projects, plans. There are between 200 and 300 kilometers of estradas vicinais, secondary roads. So, once you can penetrate the forest, of course, land becomes more valuable and it is more threatened. The impact of the flying rivers I mentioned is already being felt in states like Mato Grosso, for instance, where you have huge soybean production. And measurably, the average temperature in southern Amazonia has risen by 2 degrees already. So what we have as the upper limit under the Paris Agreement, geographically in this region, it has happened already. So the bottom line on this, here are measures that have been taken, but this is what really is happening. A simplistic bottom line is economic drivers remain stronger than public sector controls. This is just a huge beast, And as long as you can make so much money on cattle, Brazil has more heads of cattle than people. And this cattle is mainly in pre-Amazonia and pushing on. And palm oil is another driver in recent years. It wasn't in the beginning. And then, of course, land grabbing. But what Mark Twain said, buy real estate, they don't make more of it. Well, there is this sort of frontier run. And in the Brazilian historical tradition, you claim land, or land becomes yours through what they call benfeitorias, doing something good on it. And traditionally, something good in the colonial times used to be you deforest, you make it usable. So land grabbing is another factor, and nationally and maybe also with investment from elsewhere. So what is the way forward? This is a bit what I and my colleagues in Brazil work on, or what we try to explain at least. What if you would develop, of course, not just the Amazon, but this rainforest continent on Earth in terms of its very own unique potential, which is the biodiversity, and of course, the biodiversity in the forest and in the water resources. The Amazon, I think, has the greatest variety of sweetwater fish on Earth. So that is the dream, development of a bioeconomy that, however, has to be more than what we have today. Let me stay for a moment with what we have today. You can buy acai in health stores here. You can buy Amazon oil shampoo. You can buy creams for knees that hurt, which have andiroba. You can buy Chanel perfume, and it has some pau rosa, which is a sap. It's which you tap from pau rosa trees, and it goes into Chanel perfume. All of these things exist, but they're small. So there's one company buying this for this product and for that product, but if I am a community in the forest, these single products, the Brazil nuts you can probably buy here in the shop, some of them are cracked up in the field by ladies with a hammer, not even with machines. So this kind of small-scale, one or two product economy does not turn the tide. To turn the tide, you have to, on the one hand, do science. This is the first point on this 4-point list. One point is technology, to decipher the DNA in the Amazon and to assign intellectual property rights to the greatest extent possible to the local groups where these items occur. Keep in mind that Amazonia is not one place, but many, many ecosystems. Today, you can take labs, even machines that register DNA, into villages. You can teach people how to use this, and of course, in a sense, how to negotiate the build-up of industries, market chains on the basis of these products. We need, of course, as a background to this, not just the knowledge about the biodiversity and what you can do with it, but we need energy, storage, reliable transport. There is no commodity market for rainforest products, so how do you negotiate a good price? Many elements for building a new market on this rainforest continent have to come together. And this is why it's not why it has not happened yet in full, because you get this, and here you get that, but with proper planning, and in a sense the determination that here is this unique biodiversity asset, and it's not just pretty for conservation areas, but you can make money on it, and money for local people, change could come. We are now trying to get together a number of cases of villages, sub-regions, to see how in each case a product range could grow an economy that really is more attractive and more sustainable than a cattle farm which only lasts a few years, or a soybean field that belongs to some large industrial landowner. It was mentioned in the introduction, the project that my colleagues and I started with already a few years ago is that you are not going to get this catalogue of action unless you have competent people, trained people. And they have to sit in banks, for instance, talking about the financial sector. If I go to a rural bank in the Amazon, they will give me credit, probably, for cattle, but they have no idea about Andiroba or Priprioka or any of these local products. So we need these people in the public administrations, in the financial sector, in consultancy companies. So you really want to create a new class of MBA students, business students, who know what are the products, what are the industries, what can you do with that, what is the current research, and so on and so forth. And it's not as difficult as it may sound, because the bits and pieces of knowledge, it's like pieces of a mosaic which are thrown somewhere on the table, and you have to sort them into modules and courses, but it can be done. So to do this is not a distant dream, but of course is very urgent. And it should also be urgent even from the viewpoint of the new, rather nationalistic government in Brazil, because these are their own resources, and this may be the most lasting use of their very own biological biodiversity and bioresources. Not in all of the Amazon, but in the southeastern part of the Amazon, we can already see beginnings of savannization. So this means some trees still grow, but it's becoming a savanna. It's a completely different ecosystem due to climate change. And this is a real and imminent threat as we speak in these few years. We can do learning, just to leave you with an image. This is an indigenous village. The Indios have for millennia, of course in small numbers of population, lived wisely in the forest. They make openings in the forest. They don't clear the whole thing. They plant, they produce, and after a while they let the forest come back in, and the forest around it is still the same good forest and the same biodiversity. And so there is a lot we can learn, and actually we can do. This is a current picture with these people. They know a lot about their environment. So bottom line is the high road to mitigating deforestation is not just conservation, which is of course very important and is underway, but is building competence for standing forest, flowing rivers, bioeconomy, and do so fast. To leave you with an image, this, in the upper corner, this bit of forest, or the forest around, needs to become at least as profitable as what you see in the middle, soybean fields. That is the challenge to science and to business alike. And let me end on a slightly tongue-in-cheek note to any politician, and there are a few right now, supporting forest clearing, mindless forest clearing, I would sort of invent a medal of honor and send this as a biodiversity destruction medal of honor. This blue frog, which is absolutely beautiful, please keep it in your heart, but don't you ever get close. It's deadly poisonous. Thank you very much.